On October 14, 1943, at 15,000 feet over Schweinfurt, Germany, a German fighter pilot noted another entry in his logbook. He recorded his 17th heavy bomber kill. It was a B-17 Flying Fortress that spiraled down, trailing black smoke and despair. From the cockpit of his Focke-Wulf 190, he observed the remaining bombers struggling to keep their formation. The bombers' gunners fired futilely into the empty sky where German fighters had just been. Aerial combat was ruthless and straightforward. German fighters chose their moment to attack, often striking from above and escaping before the bombers could retaliate. Without fighter escorts, the American bombers were merely expensive targets. That morning, 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses entered German airspace to target the ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. By sunset, 60 of those bombers would never make it back to England. Another 17 would be so damaged they would be deemed a total loss upon landing. The Luftwaffe referred to it as a turkey shoot. The Americans labeled it Black Thursday, marking it as the darkest day in the history of the 8th Air Force. What neither side realized was that this German victory would soon be one of their last. Over the next 4 months, everything would change. The German fighter pilots in late 1943 held a strong sense of confidence. Pilots like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, along with Adolf Hedman Georg Peter Adar and Major Walter Dahl, had turned the interception of American bombers into a lethal expertise. They devised tactics that capitalized on the vulnerabilities of the bomber formations honed through successful engagements. The standard American combat box formation consisted of 18 to 21 bombers arranged in a defensive pattern, intended to fend off fighter attacks with overlapping firepower. Each B-17 was armed with 13.50 caliber machine guns designed to cover all approach angles. However, German pilots uncovered significant weaknesses, including blind spots, limited ammunition, and the chilling effect of sustained enemy attacks. Hedman Heinz Kocher, commanding 5/JG-11, had perfected head-on attacks that took advantage of the B-17's most vulnerable defensive position. He shot down his first heavy bomber, a B-24 Liberator called Maisie, and by October he had destroyed 16 more. His technique was sharp. He would approach from high above, dive through the formation at 400 miles per hour, fire a short burst at the cockpit and engines, and then break away before the top turret gunners could respond. The statistics proved the Germans' confidence. During the first Schweinfurt mission on August 17, 1943, the Luftwaffe shot down 60 bombers, which was 16% of the attacking force. American losses were so high that deep penetration raids were put on hold for weeks. When these raids resumed with the second Schweinfurt raid on October 14th, the losses were even worse. 77 bombers were lost or written off, and over 600 airmen were killed or captured in just one day. Major Gashby, group commander of the 2/JG-11, created the company front attack. 8 Focke-Wulf 190s approached in a line, overwhelming the bombers' defensive fire with multiple targets simultaneously. The psychological impact was severe. American gunners, faced with 8 fighters closing in at 600 miles per hour, had just seconds to choose their targets and often ended up shooting at nothing in their panic. The root of the American vulnerability was basic physics. No Allied fighter in 1943 could escort bombers deep into Germany. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the leading American escort fighter, had a combat radius of only 375 miles with drop tanks. That was enough to reach the German border, but no further. The twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning could fly further, but it had mechanical issues at high altitudes in the cold European climate, with engines failing and controls freezing. This limitation meant that American bombers flew the most perilous parts of their missions over Germany's heart, completely alone. German fighters waited just beyond the range of Allied escorts, then struck with concentrated force. Luftwaffe pilots referred to the point where Allied fighters turned back as the golden moment. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who would claim 206 victories before his death in October 1943, explained the tactic in recorded statements. "We tracked the bomber streams on radar, calculating precisely where their escorts would turn back. The moment the little friends left, we attacked. The bombers knew what was coming. You could see their formations tighten. This escort limitation created a dangerous arithmetic. A B-17 formation might endure 4 hours of combat over enemy territory. It took just 90 minutes of fighter protection for the American bombers. During this time, German fighters could attack, land, refuel, and rearm. They could launch new attacks while the bombers struggled to return home. Some Luftwaffe pilots conducted 3 or 4 sorties during a single raid, enhancing their combat effectiveness. The development of the P-51 Mustang did not begin as an American initiative. It started with a request from Britain. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission reached out to North American aviation for more P-40 fighters. Instead, North American suggested building a brand new fighter in just 120 days. This led to the creation of the NA-73X, which debuted on October 26, 1940. This was a remarkable feat in rapid development. The early Mustang was powered by an Allison 1710 engine. It performed well at low altitudes but struggled above 15,000 feet, where bomber escort was essential. The Royal Air Force used these early models for tactical reconnaissance and ground attacks. Their exceptional range and low-altitude performance were beneficial in these roles. The breakthrough that changed the air war came from a unique collaboration between American and British engineering. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew a Mustang with an Allison engine. He quickly recognized its potential. The airframe was excellent, even more aerodynamic than the Spitfire. However, it needed a better engine. Harker suggested fitting the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 engine. This engine was the same 2-stage supercharged model powering the latest Spitfires. The first Mustang with the Merlin engine flew in October 1942, and the results were impressive. Maximum speed increased from 390 to 440 miles per hour. Performance above 20,000 feet transformed from acceptable to outstanding. The service ceiling rose from 31,000 to 42,000 feet. The combination of American mass production capabilities and British engine technology created something neither country could have developed alone. What truly made the P-51B revolutionary was not only its performance, but its remarkable range. This was due to 3 key factors: exceptional aerodynamic efficiency from its laminar flow wing, an internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons, compared to the P-47's 305 gallons in a much lighter airframe, and the ability to carry external drop tanks without significant impact on performance. The laminar flow wing, designed by North American's Edgar, maintained smooth airflow much further back along its surface than traditional wings. This reduced drag dramatically. Nearly 30% translated into improvements in fuel efficiency. While a P-47 consumed 100 gallons per hour during cruise flight, a P-51 used only 65 gallons at the same speed. When 75-gallon drop tanks were added to the P-51B in early 1944, its combat radius expanded to 650 miles. With 108 tanks introduced in March 1944, the radius increased to 850 miles. This allowed the aircraft to reach Berlin, engage in combat for 20 minutes, and then return to England. No other single-engine fighter worldwide could match this combination of range and performance. The 354th Fighter Group, known as the Pioneer Mustang Group, received the first P-51Bs in November 1943. Based at Boxted in Essex, they were technically a part of the 9th Air Force. However, they were immediately assigned to support 8th Air Force strategic bombing missions. Their commander, Colonel Kenneth Martin, had only a few days to transition his pilots from P-47s to the new fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, who would later lead the 353 Fighter Group, flew one of the first orientation flights. He recalled, "The moment I lifted off, I knew we had something special. The Mustang handled like a sports car compared to the Thunderbolt. It was responsive, fast, and most importantly, it could fly forever." The first P-51B combat mission occurred on December 1, 1943. It involved a fighter sweep over Belgium and France. The first escort mission took place on December 5 to Amman. A relatively short-range raid, 16 P-51Bs accompanied the bombers, serving more as a combat test than a complete escort mission. They encountered no enemy fighters, but the mission demonstrated the aircraft's suitability for high-altitude escort operations. December 13 saw the first long-range escort mission to Kiel, at 490 miles from their base, which had previously been impossible for Allied fighters. The psychological impact on both sides was immediate. German pilots, expecting to intercept unescorted bombers over northern Germany, were stunned to face aggressive American fighters deep in Reich territory. The final week of 1943 witnessed increased operations as the 8th Air Force tested the Mustang's capabilities. On December 20th, P-51Bs escorted bombers to Bremen, claiming 3 German fighters without suffering any losses. The Luftwaffe, still adjusting to this new threat, continued to employ their standard tactics of waiting for escorts to depart, but the escorts were not leaving. German pilots initially confused the P-51B for the P-47 at a distance, expecting them to turn back at any moment. As the Mustangs flew east beyond the P-47's maximum range, what began as confusion quickly turned to alarm. Allied intelligence intercepted radio communication showing German controllers desperately asking pilots to identify their fighter types and positions. They could not believe that Allied escorts had ventured so deeply into Germany. Major Klaus Mittusch, leader of 3/JG-26, understood the strategic ramifications as soon as he landed after a December 30th interception. Mustangs had pursued his fighters all the way to their landing approach. He reportedly warned his pilots, "The air war has fundamentally changed. Our sanctuary no longer exists." On March 4, 1944, at 25,000 feet above Brandenburg, the sprawling outline of Berlin appeared through the scattered clouds below. This was the capital of the Reich, the core of Nazi Germany, the city that Hermann Göring had sworn would never face enemy aircraft. Above it, in perfect formation, flew 660 American heavy bombers. Surrounding them, weaving protective patterns, were numerous single-engine fighters marked with American insignia. This was the first American fighter escort to Berlin, signifying more than just a tactical success. It represented a psychological blow to the myth of German invincibility. Colonel Donald Blakesley, who commanded the 4th Fighter Group, led his 3 squadrons of P-51B Mustangs on this historic 1,100-mile round trip. The 4th Fighter Group had received their P-51Bs on February 28, 1944, and just 4 days later achieved what German leadership thought was impossible. For the Luftwaffe pilots who rose to intercept, the scene was astonishing. They had been told that Allied fighters could never reach Berlin due to the distance. Yet, there they were, fresh and aggressive after flying 500 miles, while German defenders struggled with fuel after only just taking off. What followed was intense combat. The Luftwaffe committed over 200 fighters to protect Berlin. However, they did not face exhausted bomber gunners. They contended with fresh, eager Mustang pilots who had the altitude advantage and superior aircraft. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 victories. More importantly, many German attacks on the bombers were disrupted before they could get close. For American pilots, the P-51B was a breakthrough in fighter design. Captain Donald Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who would later become one of the leading Mustang aces of the war, recounted his first combat experience in this aircraft. The Mustang delivered everything we hoped for. It had the speed to catch any German fighter. It offered the maneuverability to engage in dogfights. It also had the range to follow bombers anywhere. The cockpit of a P-51B was tight but well designed. The pilot sat behind an inline engine that allowed for excellent forward visibility. In contrast to the P-47, which had a radial engine that restricted the view, the bubble canopy of the later P-51D enhanced visibility further. Even the B model's greenhouse canopy provided good all-around sightlines. Lieutenant Robert Powell from the 352nd Fighter Group remembered the physical challenges. Spending 6 hours in a Mustang meant being on oxygen above 10,000 feet. Your mouth would feel dry from the oxygen, and your back would ache from sitting on the parachute and dinghy pack. Your neck would hurt from constantly turning to look for enemy fighters. Yet, we had the ability to complete the mission, and that made a big difference. The sight of Mustangs over Berlin created an immediate crisis for the Luftwaffe High Command. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring initially refused to believe the reports. However, gun camera footage from German fighters clearly showed P-51s flying over the capital. He allegedly remarked, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." Although this quote lacks primary sources and may not be accurate, it reflects the shock felt by German leaders. The tactical consequences were severe. All assumptions about German air defense relied on the idea that their airspace was safe from fighters. Training fields, assembly areas, and aircraft factories were placed in central Germany because they were considered secure. Now, American fighters could strafe airfields near Prague, engage German fighters over Munich, and escort bombers to any target in German territory. Major Gunther Roll, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, recognized the strategic change. The Mustang not only extended the bombing offensive but actually transformed it. We could no longer control when or where to fight. They brought the battle to us whenever they chose. The Luftwaffe attempted various tactical responses. Sturmgruppen were formed, consisting of heavily armed and armoured Focke-Wulf 190s, meant to penetrate fighter screens and attack bombers up close. However, these cumbersome assault fighters were easy targets for agile Mustangs. The Germans also tried mass attacks. The entire group attacked all at once, but American fighters had the numbers and performance to counter them. From February 20th to 25th, 1944, known as Big Week, the air war changed dramatically. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument against German aircraft production, accompanied by P-51 fighters providing continuous escort. Over 6 days, the Americans completed 3,300 bomber sorties and 3,673 fighter sorties. They lost 226 bombers but claimed the destruction of over 500 German fighters. More importantly, the Luftwaffe suffered irreversible losses in pilots. The American strategy evolved from simply bombing targets to actively engaging in aerial combat. General James Doolittle, who commanded the 8th Air Force, issued new orders in January 1944. Fighters would now seek and destroy the Luftwaffe whenever possible, rather than just escorting the bombers. Captain John Godfrey from the 4th Fighter Group described this shift in tactics. We would escort the bombers to their targets, but after they dropped their payloads, we would look for trouble. We would dive low to attack airfields, catching German fighters as they landed or took off. The math of attrition favoured the Allies heavily. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,311 pilots. In February, that number rose to 2,121. In March, it was 2,115. These losses included many experienced veteran pilots with years of combat experience. American losses, while considerable, could be replenished through the massive training programs that produced 11,000 new pilots each month. The P-51 was more than just a fighter with extended range. It reflected American industrial and technological strength. The K-14 computing gun sight introduced in late 1944 gave Mustang pilots a significant edge in deflection shooting. This gyroscopic sight automatically calculated the lead based on range and turn rate, greatly enhancing accuracy. The Mustang's 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, while less powerful than German cannons, had advantages in ammunition capacity and firing rate. A P-51 carried a total of 1880 rounds, allowing for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. In contrast, German fighters armed with cannons typically had enough ammunition for less than 10 seconds of firing. In a drawn-out dogfight, American pilots could take calculated shots, while German pilots could not. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, recognized the qualitative difference. The Mustang was not just another fighter, it was a true weapons system. Everything about it was tailored for its purpose. We had great planes, but nothing managed to bring together all aspects as well. Beneath the numbers lay a human tragedy like never before. Young men from both sides, many just out of their teens, engaged in fierce battles 6 miles above the ground in bitter cold temperatures of -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The fortunate ones died right away. Others faced terrible burns, severe amputations from cannon shells, or slow deaths in parachutes with bullet holes. Lieutenant William Wisner of the 352nd Fighter Group shot down a Bf-109 on March 8, 1944, and witnessed its pilot bail out. His parachute opened, but he was on fire. I could see him trying to extinguish the flames on his flight suit as he fell. No one could help him. German pilot Walter Schuck of JG-7 spoke about how combat changed. In 1943, we felt like knights of the air, fighting bombers in a way that seemed almost fair. By 1944, we were being hunted non-stop. Mustangs would follow us back to our bases, circle above while we attempted to land, and then attack. There was no refuge anywhere. The mental strain was overwhelming. Luftwaffe pilots who felt confident in 1943 grew increasingly pessimistic by mid-1944. Letters home, censored by German officials but kept in archives, showed their deepening despair. One pilot wrote in April 1944, "We take off knowing most of us won't return. The Americans are everywhere, always above us, always with more fuel and more ammunition." As spring turned into summer in 1944, the range of the Mustangs allowed for a strategic campaign that targeted the German war effort. Systematic destruction of oil production started. Synthetic oil plants at Lohr, Pulitz and Brooks, once out of escort range, now faced regular precision attacks with full fighter support. The effects were devastating for the Luftwaffe. Aviation fuel production plummeted from 175,000 tons in April 1944 to 30,000 tons in July and only 10,000 tons in September. Training flights were cut back and then completely stopped. New pilots arrived at combat units with as little as 50 hours of total flight time, compared to American pilots who boasted 300 to 400 hours. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commander of JG-7, described the crisis. "We had the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-262, which could reach 540 miles per hour, but we struggled to fuel them for combat missions. I watched helplessly as dozens of these incredible aircraft sat unused while Mustangs soared freely. On June 6, 1944, air superiority flipped entirely. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe only managed 319 sorties over France, while the Allies conducted 14,674. Just 2 German fighters showed up over the invasion beaches. The Mustangs and other Allied fighters established such dominance that the invasion went forward under an aerial shield, largely unconfronted by German aircraft. Obestatant Josef Pips Prill, in command of JG-26, flew one of those 2 sorties alongside his wingman Unteroffizier Heinz Vodakik. After making a solitary strafing run along Sword Beach, Prill later referred to the mission as suicide disguised as duty. They survived only because Allied fighters were too astonished to respond to their single FW-190. The role of the Mustangs expanded beyond escort service to active fighter bombing. P-51 pilots became skilled at targeting trains, destroying locomotives with their 50 caliber guns. A single Mustang could carry 2 500-pound bombs or 10 5-inch rockets in addition to its guns, making it a powerful ground attack plane. Captain Charles Chuck Jagger, who later broke the sound barrier, flew P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, he shot down 5 Messerschmitt Bf-109 in one mission. However, he also spoke about the moral dilemmas. They shifted from protecting bombers to targeting anything that moved. They would strafe trains knowing they could be transporting civilians. It was total war. The Mustang allowed them to extend that war throughout Germany. Germany's response included revolutionary jet fighters such as the Messerschmitt Me-262 and the rocket-powered Me-163 Comet. The Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, was nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51D. In the hands of skilled pilots, it could slice through bomber formations and escape before Mustangs could react. Despite these technological advancements, they could not change the outcome. Adolf Galland, flying an Me-262 with JV-44 in 1945, shot down 7 aircraft but understood the hopelessness of the situation. He compared them to a few tigers confronting hundreds of wolves. For every Me-262, the Americans fielded 50 Mustangs. These Mustangs could hover over German airfields, striking jets when they were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. The jet engines from 1944 to 1945 were finicky, needing careful throttle management and longer runways. Mustang pilots learned to exploit these vulnerabilities. Lieutenant Urban Drew from the 361st Fighter Group shot down 2 Me-262s on October 7, 1944. The jets, running low on fuel and preparing to land, were vulnerable to the diving Mustangs. By early 1945, Germany faced an impossible situation in air combat. The United States produced 15,486 P-51 Mustangs during the war, with around 8,000 deployed in Europe. In March 1945, the 8th Air Force had 14 fighter groups, primarily with Mustangs, totaling over 1,000 aircraft. In contrast, the Luftwaffe could only muster about 300 to 400 operational fighters on any day across the entire German Reich. Due to fuel shortages, many aircraft remained on the ground. Pilot shortages meant that the few who flew were often teenagers with little training. The kill ratios clearly showed this disparity. By 1945, Mustang pilots claimed 10 victories for every loss. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, leader of the 352nd Fighter Group, ended the war with 24 victories in Mustangs. He noted, by 1945 it wasn't combat, it was execution. We would locate German airfields, circle above, and shoot down anyone attempting to take off or land. The Mustang turned all of Germany into a combat zone. After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots shared insights about the Mustang's influence. General Adolf Galland wrote in his memoirs, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Before it came, we controlled the timing of air battles over Germany. After its arrival, we never regained the initiative." Major Heinz Kanoki, who had 33 victories, was more straightforward. He said, "The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe, not the bomber offensive, not the invasion, but that fighter capable of flying to Poland and back. We shifted from predators to prey in just 3 months." Younger pilots who entered combat later in the war provided particularly poignant testimony. They often flew their first missions with minimal training, facing seasoned American pilots in superior aircraft. One captured pilot recounted, "I flew my first combat mission in November 1944, with only 55 hours of flight time. On my third mission, I encountered Mustangs for the first time. They were everywhere. At that moment, I realized we had lost not just the war but control of the skies. The Mustang's impact went beyond tactical wins. By facilitating deep penetration raids with manageable losses, it enabled the systematic destruction of German industry. By March of 1945, production was down to just 10% of what was needed. The transportation system was in ruins, making it impossible to move troops, supplies, or raw materials. Although aircraft production remained high through dispersal, it was pointless without fuel for the planes or trained pilots to fly them. General Karl Spaatz, who led the United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, remarked that the P-51 was the key weapon of the European air war. It enabled the daylight bombing missions, the invasion of Europe, and the systematic dismantling of German military strength. Beyond its strategic effects, the P-51 caused significant changes in people. German pilots who entered combat in 1943 with confidence came out as different individuals if they survived. Many recalled moments when they realized their defeat was inevitable, often tied to their first encounters with P-51 Mustangs deep in Germany. Some German pilots transitioned from enemies to admirers. Many Luftwaffe veterans, after seeing American material strength and humane treatment of prisoners, began to doubt the propaganda they had been fed about their foes. The stark difference between Nazi propaganda and reality hit morale and ideology hard. The P-51 marked a turning point in fighter design, influencing aircraft development for many years. Its laminar flow wing showcased the potential for significant drag reduction. The combination of British engine technology with American airframe design set a precedent for international collaboration that would extend through NATO and other alliances. The Mustang's range achievements altered beliefs about fighter aircraft. Before the war, the idea was that fighters were meant for short-range defense. The P-51 demonstrated that fighters could serve as strategic assets capable of striking hundreds of miles from their bases. This idea influenced everything from the F-86 Sabre in Korea to modern fighters that can be deployed globally with aerial refueling. The final numbers on the Mustang's impact are impressive. A total of 15,486 Mustangs were produced. They accounted for 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat over Europe and 4,131 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground. Additionally, 17 and Christians of Olivetis. They took out 4,131 locomotives and completed 9,254 combat sorties and over 213,873 combat hours, with 134,420 operational losses. The kill-to-loss ratio in air combat exceeded 11-1, a remarkable achievement in aerial warfare. The true impact goes beyond just numbers. The Mustang crushed the German will to fight, aided the invasion of Europe, and shortened the war by many months. The shift from German laughter at unescorted bombers to a state of complete aerial weakness happened rapidly. In October 1943, the German Luftwaffe controlled the skies over Germany, effortlessly shooting down bombers. By March 1944, Mustangs were escorting those bombers to Berlin. By June 1944, the Luftwaffe was not effective in combat. By April 1945, it had vanished as a fighting force. This change did not happen slowly. It was a disaster. The Luftwaffe did not decline gradually. It fell apart. The arrival of Mustangs over Germany triggered a series of defeats that made recovery impossible. Each lost pilot could not be replaced easily. Each destroyed aircraft limited training capabilities. Each successful escort mission encouraged Allied planners to attack deeper and more aggressively. The losses for German pilots tell a clear story. In 1943, 2,967 pilots were lost. In 1944, 12,037 pilots were lost. From January to May 1945, 4,238 pilots were lost. Average pilot experience dropped sharply. In 1943, pilots had over 250 flight hours before combat. By early 1944, that was down to 150 hours. In late 1944, it dropped to 80 hours. By 1945, pilots had only 40 to 50 hours. Perhaps the Mustang's greatest success was its psychological impact. It shattered the belief in German technological superiority. It showed American manufacturing strength and proved that democracy could create better weapons than dictatorship. German pilots who laughed at American bombers in 1943 were, by 1945, refusing to undertake suicide missions against formations protected by Mustangs. Young Luftwaffe pilots, taught Nazi ideology, experienced confusion when facing American superiority. Everything they had learned about racial superiority and German technical skills was challenged by the elegant and powerful fighter dominating their skies. In 1985, 40 years after the war ended, American and German pilots gathered at a reunion in San Antonio, Texas. Conversations during that event revealed the long-term effects of the Mustang on both sides. Colonel Clarence Bud Anderson, who flew 116 combat missions in Mustangs and achieved 16 1/4 aerial victories, raised his glass while sitting across from Ust-Gar, Germany's third highest scoring ace, and said to the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war, "We had great aircraft and skilled pilots. We were fighting over our homeland. But then there was the Mustang, and that changed everything." Walter Schuck, who went from FW-1900s to ME-262 jets, said, "In 4 months we went from laughing at unescorted bombers to hiding from Mustangs. No military force has ever faced such a total turnaround." Former Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff, marked by scars from his Mi-262 crash in April 1945, reflected, "In 1943, we laughed at your bombers. We could not imagine that America could create a fighter with the range to escort them to Berlin. The P-51 Mustang taught us how dangerous it is to underestimate our enemies. When did we know the war was lost? It was that day in March 1944 when we saw Mustangs over Berlin. At that moment, every German pilot understood the truth. We had already lost. The shift from German pilots mocking unescorted American bombers to fearing Mustang fighters is one of the most significant reversals in military history. In under 6 months, icon to our tools, from October 1943 to March 1944, the Luftwaffe fell from dominance to defeat, from predator to prey, and from confidence to despair. The P-51 Mustang sparked this change, but it represented something more significant. It showcased American industrial strength, democratic cooperation among allies, and technological innovation driven by necessity. German pilots who believed that American democracy weakened the nation discovered a society capable of remarkable unity and production. The laughter of German pilots in October 1943 was based on a fair assessment of technical limits. No single-engine fighter had ever shown the range needed to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. What they didn't see coming was American problem-solving abilities, the successful blend of American and British technology, and the industrial capacity to manufacture thousands of exceptional fighters within months. When Mustangs appeared over Berlin on March 4, 1944, the laughter ended permanently. Instead, there came a painful realization that everything German pilots thought about their enemies, their own superiority, and the war's outcome had been incorrect. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win the air war, it shattered illusions and destroyed confidence. This story dispels myths and shows that technological dominance in war relies on industrial strength, global collaboration, and democratic progress. The German pilots who survived never forgot this lesson. In their memoirs and interviews, they frequently recalled the arrival of the P-51 Mustangs over Germany. This was the moment they realized the war was lost. It was not the invasion of Normandy or the fall of Berlin that signified their defeat. It was when American fighter planes appeared where they shouldn't be, providing cover for bombers headed straight into the heart of the Reich with enough fuel to engage in combat. 79 years later, the P-51 Mustang stands as the ultimate emblem of American air superiority during World War II. This aircraft silenced the laughter and put an end to the Reich's control over its skies. The German pilots who laughed in October 1943 understood by March 1944 that their amusement was misplaced. By May 1945, many of them were no longer alive to reflect on their overconfidence. Ultimately, this account highlights the risks of underestimating opponents, the strength of industrial democracy, and the significant effects a single weapon system can have on history. The Mustang demonstrated that, in modern industrial warfare, bravery and skill alone are not enough. Victory is achieved by those who can produce the most, train the best, and innovate the fastest. The change was total, unchangeable, and devastating. The laughter turned to silence, and the P-51 Mustang etched its name across European skies as the fighter that ended the Luftwaffe's dominance, and with it, the hopes of Nazi Germany for victory.